Welcome to this edition of ACS Industry Insights. My name is Jo Stewart-Rattray and I'm the Chief Security Officer at Silver Chain Group, which is a large in-home hospital care provider in Australia. And I'm also Vice President Communities for the Australian Computer Society, and I'm also the Oceania Regional Ambassador for ISACA, which means that I've served on the International Board of Directors for ISACA, which I did so for 7 years. It's a great honour to host today's webinar discussing the findings from ISACA's Global State of Cybersecurity 2024 report. This report has been making headlines for years now, and it really does give us something to hang on to as cyber professionals. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we each are on today, and I'm on the lands of the Ngadjuri people in the mid-north of South Australia, because they are the traditional owners of the land. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging leaders, and to all Aboriginal elders and other community members who may be in attendance today. ACS is really excited about the growing partnership that we have formed with ISACA, as both organisations are dedicated to combining knowledge and resources. We're on a mission to enhance technology governance, bolster cybersecurity standards, and provide top-notch professional development opportunities for our constituency bases, both here and across the world. Our goal is to cultivate a thriving digital ecosystem right here in Australia. I'd just like to reiterate what's been put in the chat box by our ACS events team, and that's when we approach the audience Q&A component, use the Q&A box on the sidebar on the right-hand side of your screen and take the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. We'll try our very best to get to all of them, but sometimes that's not possible given the time that we have available to us. But certainly, you know, if something comes up for you as you're seeing the presentation, make sure you hit that Q&A straight away. I'd like to now invite our speaker, Jon Brandt, who's the Director of Professional Practices and Innovation at ISACA, to join with me. And I'll just give you a little bit of information about Jon. In his particular role, he leads audit, emerging technology, information security, privacy and risk thought leadership initiatives relevant to ISACA's constituents, which keeps him fairly busy, I'd say. He serves across the ISACA framework as a subject matter expert on information security, and he spearheads innovative workforce readiness solutions and related performance assessments. Jon is a highly accomplished US Navy veteran with nearly 30 years of experience spanning multidisciplinary security, cyber operations, and technical workforce development. Jon, we thank you for all of that service to your country and indeed, no doubt, helping keep the rest of the world safe as well. So I'll hand over to you, Jon, and Jon will present to you the findings from the Global State of Cybersecurity report. Jon, over to you.
Thank you, Jo. Appreciate that. Next slide, please. Welcome to all those who are tuning in here. We have a lot of information to move through. The first part of this, some of the overview on the demographics, I'm going to move through kind of quick. All of the figures and everything you're going to find in this presentation can be found in the actual survey report. I encourage you to download that. There's a lot more in there that with regards to what we could cover here today, because I do want to be able to take as many questions as well as call on Jo here to provide some, any color commentary regional to help kind of bolster the message. Next slide. On here on screen here, you're just going to see kind of a summary of where the demographics were with the respondents. ISACA survey, this particular survey report goes out to everybody who holds a CISM, the CSXP or has a security title registered with ISACA here. You'll look here on screen with the demographic. Oceania represented 5% of the survey respondents there. Technology services consultant tops the list again this year. And you see that 36% actually have a main responsibility in security management. Next slide. If you would hit it one more time, please. Okay, so I'm going to call attention here to this, to the call out box. Things are trending worse here when we start looking at the age breakout within the profession right now. You know, undoubtedly, ISACA, this is 10 years of reporting that we've done, and it's given us opportunity to really kind of dig in year after year and chase different leads, if you will, because just to tell the profession across the globe that there's a shortage between supply and demand, that's largely it's ineffective at this point. Like, so we want to continue to go down, and that way those of you that are on the front lines, hiring managers, governmental bodies and whatnot, or skills providers can use our information, potentially make some adjustments, and hopefully improve the picture. But this year, the age group of respondents between ages 45 and 54 overtook the 35 to 44. We call that out because there's been other industry reporting talking about a growing, the aging workforce right now. What this may not necessarily account for our you know, it's a little deceiving, right? Because if we look at those coming into the profession through a traditional trajectory out of, if they go to university or from secondary school in, where they would traditionally come in those younger ages. However, we are aware that there are people that are transitioning in as career changers. However, having said all that, having the bulk of the workforce in those two ranges for the foreseeable future is just going to continue to trend bad. And you'll see that we actually saw that, you know, last year's downtick in the 25 to 34 also carried forward this year. So again, at the end of the day, it's a data point. This particular isn't saying that the sky is falling, but it's something to really kind of look at, especially for continuity planning within your enterprises. Next slide. This section here, we're going to look at staffing, growth, benefits, and retention here. This is always an area of interest for people. Next slide. When we look at this slide here, you're going to see just where staffing level was between 2024 and the year prior. The number that are reporting appropriately staffed, right, increased a little bit. Somewhat understaffed did decrease, and whereas there was really is a nominal shift at the significantly understaffed. Of note here is that we did look at specifically the enterprises that are using AI to mitigate shortfalls, and there was no correlation to that point. Next slide. I'm to fill cybersecurity positions here. You see this on the screen here. Right? I think the big thing to be mindful of is we recognize there's a lot of evidence, whether through industry reporting or, you know, those that are the job seekers that take to you know, to platforms like LinkedIn and to talk about their experience. Undoubtedly, there's still it does take quite a bit of time to source the right individuals. When we during the sponsored presentation of this with Adobe, it was interesting. You know, one of the things that was called out in that particular presentation is that organizations now, so more than ever, really can do themselves a lot of favors by being upfront as to what their process looks like. If you know that your process is going to involve multiple rounds of interviews and typically takes, you know, a certain number of weeks or a range of that, be upfront with that. That way, because sometimes there's the expectations of the applicants don't necessarily meet what it is, the actual hiring processes, especially within your larger organizations. For me personally, I think one of the things that's still a little surprising is that it takes the greatest amount of time to hire entry level positions, and that of everything in here, I think is still the piece to look at. And because the way with this survey, the way that we actually position this was entry level positions are those that do not require experience or degrees in particular. So the fact that it's taking through, that respondents are saying it's even for entry level, it's taken 3 to 6 months. It feels like there's a little room for improvement there. Jo, anything you'd like to add on that particular point?
Yeah, absolutely, John. I have to say that even bringing professionals on board, so people with degrees and people with experience, is a long-winded process in this part of the world. There are a lot of people out there looking for work in cyber, but if you're looking for an experienced individual, I've had this recently with a couple of positions that I was looking to fill. It took up to 8 months to fill those positions. And there is also unrealistic expectations of salary in the lesser experienced ranks as well.
I'm really glad that you brought that up as well, because it's a continual theme that we hear right now, and we've been, Jo, you and I've had these conversations over the years, and we have them on staff. And part of the challenge with this too is that the industry as a whole could not substantiate the year after year increases in salary, right? At some point,
Correct.
There needed to be a normalization, and I think that's kind of where we're feeling that right now.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely agree with you on that.
Next slide, please. Okay, so looking at here, this was a report of open security positions here. You see, again, we do break out both non-entry level and entry level. We do have a year-over-year comparison here. There were decreases in openings in both areas. You'll see that on screen there. Whereas this was not a universal thing. The fact of the matter is, global economic conditions, we've seen this over years, those things do affect this. And here, at least within the United States, being the largest population within the reporting size, that does carried a lot of weight. And there's this concept of the big stay right now, which is a stark contrast from what we saw a couple of years ago, where people were leaving jobs in droves. So in some ways, not to say that employers are in the driver's seat per se, but when conditions warrant, it does swing the pendulum a little bit, and it does seem like people are a little bit more likely to stay in place. Next slide, please. When we dig into unfilled positions, this slide and the next one, we're going to look at individual contributors, right? These are basically your non-supervisory, either technical or non-technical. And then the next screen we're going to look at are your managerial levels here. This particular data point here represents the sum of all reported vacancy, excluding do not know and none. So you will see it's pretty obvious if you kind of look at the trend here on these positions here, they've followed a similar flow year after year, and there's been a significant decrease this year. So, Jo, you had just mentioned, some of the unreasonable expectations that are out there as well. When the demand goes down, it's going to impact that even more, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely true. The other thing is there are a couple of questions coming through, or a couple of statements coming through about insights into the key skill requirements for entry-level people, particularly in our technical and further education space in Australia. I think part of the issue is a lot of organisations today are finding that they don't have the bandwidth, and other than the very big organizations do not have the bandwidth to take on graduates who are from perhaps a certificate 3 or 4 level and train them on the job, because they come out with a certain amount of knowledge, but they then need to be trained on the job. And I think that's where, when the market goes down, these are the roles that suddenly are very hard to push people into, because they're the ones that seem to be discretionary and go away.
I'm glad you brought up that point. I think back probably about 9 years. I think it was my first year on staff. In the first conference, there was one of the session speakers had asked the question of how many organizations actually have a training program. And honestly, the number of people that went up, you could count them on one hand right back then. And arguably, it hasn't changed much for some of the points that you're calling out. But we're also not helping ourselves as a profession, because if you look at how roles are, what they're called, and the skills that are and knowledge that are associated with that, there's some differences globally too, and with a lack of agreement on how work is categorized and done, and it's obviously swayed based on the industry as well as the size of the company, right? To which you had spoken to. So there's no easy answers here and all here, I think, but the thing that keeps me up at night is there's a lot of individuals who have spent hard-earned time, money, made personal sacrifices for programs for the promise of getting into a profession, and a lot of them have been unable to. So I feel like, there's collectively we have a responsibility to figure that out, because there's a skills atrophy that's happening that's very real.
Agreed.
Next slide, please. Okay, so you will see the same thing. So just like we saw in the prior thing, again, interestingly enough, like the curve, right, the ups and downs follows a very similar thing to what we saw with the individual contributors. The decrease between individual contributor and management was actually a little bit more steep, right, which is interesting on one hand. However, on the other, when you consider 36% of the respondents actually were security management. However, again, the story here is there was a decline this year, and there's been a decline for a couple years now, and it is rude. People need to be monitoring that as well, because I think we're seeing this normalization for a couple different reasons. It doesn't mean that the cyber problems are going away by any stretch. And we see that in the headlines. Breaches continue to happen, but it does feel like enterprises, by and large, are at this point where they're just having to figure it out with the staffing that they've had, and where possible augment with technology. Next slide. And when we look at hiring demand, the numbers for themselves speak for themselves here. You'll see from top to bottom, individual contributor, technical, all the way down to your executive folks. The managerial are either remaining as is or a slight uptick, right? The technical ones have dropped, and again, that kind of speaks to that point earlier. Is I feel like there's this point where organizations, obviously, a lot of effort goes into sourcing talent, and there's some point, like if you're not finding talent, or it's just taking in, you're not getting the right applicants. At some point, it does feel like organizations, not just may possibly kind of be throwing their hands up and saying, well, we'll try again down the road or whatnot. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to talk about benefits here, because when we talk about, Joe alluded to it and I reinforced it, we talk about people have grand visions of all the money they can make in this profession. And don't get me wrong, it is highly lucrative by and large against many organizations. However, we are, I think there's some normalization. However, when economic conditions and business conditions start getting affected, organizations tend to have they start looking at ways for cost savings. This is just business 101. And so you'll see here up on screen, the big takeaway there is that professional development training dollars decreased, according to respondents there. And on the right side of the screen, I put that development there because I think there's something to be mindful of here is that professional development dollars are typically amongst the first to go when organizations are looking for money to save. And some of that, there's different opinions on it. Oftentimes it's perceived value, right? There's a lack of perceived value. So it's an easy target. But on the right there, I want you to visualize the tension that I'm concerned about here is if professional dollars are going down for existing staff, and we know that data says that companies are still continuing to train non-security staff, then you potentially have a cultural issue, and you might disenfranchise your current staff if we're training people to come in, but you're not actually investing in them to remain current or to advance their careers. So again, it's a data point, but I do think in the grand scheme of things, if you're a hiring manager or you manage people, you understand the challenges to try to keep your people motivated, make it beneficial for both parties. This is something to surely keep in mind. Anything you'd like to add on that point, Jo?
Yes, John, I think you're absolutely right. It is always seen as a discretionary spend. Professional development is always a discretionary spend. So if there's a squeeze on budget, you can bet your bottom dollar that the squeeze is going to be on any kind of professional development. Also, I've been seeing in the marketplace many more professionals having to pay for their own professional development opportunities. Employers are saying, no, we'll only allow you one event per year or whatever. And we know, those of us who are managing multiple qualifications, we need more continuing professional education points than that. So that's another issue that we as professionals have to take on. So whilst the salary might look great, we may have to also then consider financing our own university or indeed our own professional development activities.
I'm glad you brought that point because it is that we see that on screen here between the first and the third bullet there. There is and there has been a disparity between employees, and certification fees have been getting paid higher than the maintenance costs associated with that. And that's unfair to the practitioners right there. In the grand scheme of things, the recertification cost is by and large, regardless of what certification body you go to, is less than the initial investment, oftentimes, especially if it's involving training. So great call out. Next slide, please. When we look at factors influencing attrition here, so recruitment by other companies is significantly down. All right, that's just, and again, it kind of speaks to it does appear that hiring has slowed, or where positions may be vacant, it's either taken too long. Again, there's nothing concrete to this point, but when there's a lot of chatter amongst job seekers, either current or new, that in aggregate, where you're applying for positions and nobody seems to be getting hired, it does kind of allude to this thing that maybe the organization's not really serious about hiring. I sure as heck hope that isn't happening, because it's not a good look for the company and for the people there. But you can't discount that. Looking ahead, for anybody tuning in, ISACA will be doing a LinkedIn Live later next week with a cyber recruiter, and I'm going to ask you that exact question. So, little preview there. Next slide, please. Looking at retention here, retention's leveled off here, and again, that's just a sign of the times that and some of the data points that we've spoken to up to now. Next slide. For the retention here, though, I love this slide here because it shows the difference by region. I had alluded to, right, for the North America people, obviously, like, economic conditions are at least more widely reported up here. But you do see Oceania is actually, with regards to retention difficulty, it doesn't look too bad. It's up there on the higher end of things right now. Well, I mean, sorry, that it is still a challenge there. I was reading that slide the wrong way there. So that just speaks there must be a robust market. So, Joe, this is something surely I think you would have some good views on for our listeners.
I think it goes back to what you were saying before, John. When people are settled in a role, they're less likely to want to move in a hurry. And the previous slide talked about people who are recruited by other companies. There is a lot more of that tapping on the shoulder going on as well. I mean, I've just recently lost a staff member that way as well. It was a friend of a friend tapped him on the shoulder to a job that was the next layer up, an organisation that was paying far more money. And so, there is you can't do anything about that as an employer. So that's the interesting thing. And just for our viewers today, Oceania is Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea. That's in terms of the ISACA region. So Oceania is Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea.
Thanks for that call out, Joe. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to dig into the pipeline here. Next slide. With regards to views on applicant qualifications, in particular, survey response were asked how many applicants are well qualified for the position by which they're applying. The numbers, these are pretty consistent year after year, right? Views on credentials and hands-on training are unchanged. Those ultimately, credentials and hands-on training remain highly favorable. Nothing trumps experience, right? When it comes down to which is this interesting paradox, right? In a lot of ways, because the people who have experience are the people currently in the workforce, and those are the people that we're kind of recycling and moving into other positions. So we do need to find some way to get the unexperienced some experience. That way they're also moving in. And I do think those are some of the opportunities that some of the apprenticeship programs that we do see across the globe, while not at scale, they do help some. There was a decreased emphasis on prior employer recommendations and university degrees from last year, and this year respondents overwhelmingly, there was an increase in the importance of association membership and the value they get from there. Next slide, please. When we look at top skills requiring attention here, although soft skills continue to dominate all others at 51%, this option did decrease 4 percentage points from last year. So it does feel for the means and methods by which organizations are trying to address that, it looks like there could be some positive improvement there, which is always good. Respondents report betterments in cloud computing, which went down 5 percentage points, coding down 3 percentage points, and software development related topics, data, and pattern analysis each went down 2 percentage points. So ultimately, there's been a lot of betterment on that. That's all good. Security controls at 35%, network operations at 21%, and computing devices 10% were unchanged from the year before. And this year we did add large language model security operations and machine learning security operations as response options for the appropriate questions. Next slide, please. Focusing specifically, we're going to hone in here on the security related skills here. Top 3, right, at top 4 have largely remained unchanged over the years, although there's always a kind of a shuffling of the deck based on what's been happening throughout the reporting, right? Breaches, if we've had a couple bad years here, and we do see where based on that things shift here. Not surprising, data protection leapfrog to the top this year, again with the explosion of AI, a hyper focus on data as this in the valuable currency that it is in a lot of regards. I envision that that's going to remain up there in that top spot. When we talk about mitigating these security skills, training non-security professionals, we already talked about that, bringing them in, decreased use of contract. There was a decreased usage of contractors and consultants, which kind of speaks to budgets are tightening, right? All of a sudden, there's a little bit less money to go around and bring in stuff. And then AI and automation actually recovered from the year prior after we saw what appeared to be a knee-jerk reaction to GPT-4 hitting the screens last year. Next slide. When looking at actual non-technical, right, your soft skills here, this were respondent responses for the last 3 years. Communication tops the chart, followed by critical thinking there. Attention to detail rounds out the top 5. Again, it's worth mentioning, I'm going to continue to beat this drum, that attention to detail did fall 3 percentage points in the last couple of years. That's kind of concerning for the type of work we do. Honesty continues to not be valued, and empathy also dropped 2 percentage points. I always make it a point, I always want to keep highlighting the honesty piece, because there's been plenty of reporting out there that despite whatever regulatory levers get put in place, that practitioners, regardless of what mandates may be out there, aren't always reporting. And the fact that honesty it ranks lower in the grand scheme of things it's a lot of concern for me too, especially with a lot of people are betting big on AI. And at the end of the day, if you look at AI data and then we know that people are fallible, right? Like at the end of the day, like people, and we need people to be the checks and balances for the technology that we're building, right? We talk about the human in the loop concept and the validation. So to me, the critical thinking, the attention to detail, the chasing things down becomes increasingly important for the foreseeable future. And I argue that as a whole, the cybersecurity profession, I think there's a reframing that needs to happen beyond just protecting corporate data and other intellectual property or physical assets into actually protecting the way of life that we really are, with this nexus of technology in all areas of how we live. Jo, anything you'd like to add between, on skills in general?
Yeah, look, I think for me, certainly, I hate the term soft skills, because these skills are, you knew I was going to say that, right? Because these skills are actually often not something that people can learn if it's not inherent to them to be a good listener, for instance. But I would add, listening and speaking skills are very important, but also written skills are really important in what we do. The number of reports that cyber professionals find themselves having to write, or briefing notes to executives, that's really important. So yes, you've got to have the technical skills, but when it comes to these sort of skills, the interpersonal type skills, definitely, I think that's the number one for me, is communications, written, spoken, and listening. And critical thinking would have to be definitely the next. But I agree with you, John. Empathy and trustworthiness and honesty have to be part of our landscape. Look what we do for a living. If we're not living and breathing that, then there's something really wrong.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you so much. Next slide. All right, shifting into budgets. Next slide. Okay, probably one of the best screaming for money scenes ever in a motion picture there. I think the interesting thing here is, well, let me back up. 36% of respondents indicate that their budget is appropriately funded, which was a 5 percentage point drop from last year, while 44% feel their budgets are somewhat underfunded, which was a 4-point increase. Again, does seem like there's budgets are tightening here, but what it was interesting, this other piece of it is that I called out on screen here, is the flow of venture capital actually declined as well. And when you look at that area they've thrived for many years, been a lot of advancements, a lot of companies on the scene there. So I do think that, if anything else, maybe we're at a point of saturation with the number of players that are in the market that are trying to solve problems, right? And it's something to be mindful of. Don't know what the actual trend of it is. When you look at business continuity, the thing that I think we should all be concerned about is that the internet was never designed to be centralized, and yet that's exactly where we've been trending. So now we've got bigger targets, right? We've got these, whether they're major tech provider platforms, cloud platforms, or, the service large de facto standard providers anymore. They've got a big bullseye on their back right now. And if, in fact, they're affected, then the cascading effect is numerous because they serve a lot of people. Not really sure that we're going to get away from that, but I do think that even with some of the other work that we're doing with people, we are hearing some organizations actually rolling back the on-prem equipment. So not sure that that's going to be a prevailing theme, but the fact that some are out there doing it says that, hey, it's gotten some attention right now. And because at the end of the day, those of you that are relying on these services, your brand is paying the price. In some cases, your company's going to go out of business for that, and nobody wins in that regard. Next slide. When we talk about what respondents were asked about their future outlook, 47% believe budgets will increase. Ultimately, for years, I was talking about the leveling that happened. So if you look at 2019 beginning there, we saw this incremental up and down, right? Which was getting smaller over the year. And now for 2 consecutive years, we've seen a dip. So it does. I'm not a big fan of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? The FUD, but it does have the signs of a multi-year free fall, right? And so if you're looking at this, or it is something you want to be considering, or figuring out if you can actually, getting advanced reads from your financial officers to try to get ahead of that, because which is a challenge, especially when cost of goods and services seems to be going up year after year. Next slide. Digging into cyber attacks. So there we go. Very good here. So on screen is a year-over-year comparison. Again, we go back to 2018. As you can tell, I'm a huge fan of longitudinal views. I think it adds a lot of value there, because year to year does not always portray the best picture there. Respondents are experiencing more cyber attacks compared to a year ago. You didn't need to come to my webinar, right, in this presentation to know that. But and nearly half believe that their enterprises will experience a cyber attack next year, which I think is a little optimistic. But again, attacks are not going to go away. It's the sign of the times. Attacks are getting more, in some ways, more sophisticated. Generative AI is empowering the bad actors, probably a little bit more so than it's helping from a defense perspective at this point. And so, those of you that are trying to protect the enterprise and everything, you kind of, it's, what's the best way? You're kind of always on playing defense right now is the best way of putting it. Next slide. I'm going to have the great Chief Security Officer here weigh in on this point here after second there. But when you look at organizational confidence, this was no notable change, but I always get a little leery with the top number there. Anybody's completely confident in their ability to detect things, they're either the unicorn out there or a little naive. Anything you want to add, Joe?
Oh, absolutely agree. I would always want to sit in the somewhat confident basket, because quite honestly, we don't know what's coming down the pipeline towards us. That's the thing, right? We do not have a crystal ball that's going to really help us in this. And you're right when you say that generative AI is probably advantaging the bad guys. I think that's true of any new technology that comes down the pipeline. The bad guys actually utilize it faster and probably in some ways, I hate to say it, better than we do on the defense side. So I think we have to be very mindful of that. So whilst there's a lot of, I think, almost hysteria about AI at the moment, we have to also bear in mind what it's doing in our world and stay in that somewhat confident basket, which means that you know there is room for improvement in what you're doing.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the point too, especially if you're relying on vendor solutions, there's a level of tuning and everything. And it's really relying upon you understanding what normal traffic is to you,
Yes.
right, as well.
That's really important. If you don't understand what normal traffic looks like, how can you possibly understand what anomalous behavior and traffic on your networks look like?
Absolutely. Okay, next slide. Just a snapshot here on the threat actors. If your organization was exploited this year, which of the following threat actors were to blame? This was a select all that apply here. I think the big data point here, those of you that, oftentimes, those of you that are involved in actually creating or delivering or enforcing the security education and awareness training, listen, there's some fruit to your labor here on screen here. If you look at the right here. So on the left, that data hasn't really changed. It's pretty consistent, but non-malicious insiders declined 2 percentage points this year. That's a good thing. And social engineering, unfortunately, went up, which again shouldn't be too surprising. It remains the prevailing way because people are fallible at the end of the way. Okay, next slide. Shifting over to cyber risk here. Next slide. On the left screen here is that figure there refers to the question of how often is your cyber risk assessment performed at your organization? Annually increased 2 percentage points. Listen, I understand that we have to pick a target to choose, and it seems to be the common one, but arguably most people feel like one annually is too infrequent. So admittedly, the question doesn't really account for maybe some agile work that's happening between the fix cycle. I do think that's a gap in the reporting there, but on its face here, a lot changes just from day to day, week to week, let alone within a year there. So if nothing's happening in between those years, it's no wonder that we're getting beat up on the digital front lines. On the right-hand side, that pie graph here is respondents' beliefs as to whether they believe their board of directors adequately prioritizes cybersecurity. That remains unchanged right now. 9% say feel no, another 10 don't. Jo, you do a lot of work with the board, right? You're at that level here. Anything you want to add?
Look, I think it comes back to boards, certainly in this country, have gotten very frightened in recent years since we've had a couple of major breaches. And so there's been a knee-jerk reaction to security as well. And so it's a case of, lock it all down, don't let anybody do anything. So, you've got to talk them off the ledge, essentially, to get it back. And in a lot of organizations where they're not technology organizations and technology is therefore not necessarily front of mind, you have to work with the executive to ensure that they understand what this means to them as well. And it's the same with working with the board. They have to understand the issues that we're facing on a day-to-day basis. I'm very lucky. I report to the Audit and Risk Committee, which is a subcommittee of board. So that means that what's happening in security does go to the board. Having said that, though, it has to be framed in such a way that it's understandable to a business person. We have to make sure, it's the old story, John, that you and I have talked about many times before. It's about ensuring that we speak the language of business.
Absolutely. It ultimately comes down to that, which is what then it highlights the importance of, I think, humans. Do you like human skills or interpersonal skills better than soft? I'm working on you. I'm trying to meet you in the middle.
I kind of, I can see that one of our participants has put them up there. Technical skills. Well, technical skills to me this is not technical skills.
Right.
Professional skills, I think, that's kind of nice. But frankly, I think human skills is probably better, or
Okay.
interpersonal skills to me. Yeah.
Yeah. We just need the academics to catch up because we've long been saying soft. So, but point
Correct.
taken. I knew I was opening that for you as
A
soon as I said
can
it.
of worms.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about cyber insurance here. We added these slides this year. Um, in some cases, people kind of feel like this is just the proverbial easy button, right? It's the silver bullet. It solves everything. Views on this are a little contentious. We're not. I'm just reporting on the data here. With regards to this here, you see that the numbers on screen there. I don't need to read those to you, but going clockwise with starting at 10% is what kind of cyber insurance, if any, does your organization carry? So 10% said first party, followed by third party at 16%, and then both first and third was 15. The do not know was extremely large, which there was a relationship with that with the size of the organization, which isn't surprising. The larger the organization, um, kind of compartmental into areas, but I think that we collectively organization could potentially benefit from that information. Similarly, I could look at the flip side of that is if you know what kind of insurance here is and you are worried about insider threat and maybe employees going out there or being leveraged, then all of a sudden it's another data point for the bad actors. So just something to consider here. Regionally, sorry, go back. 57% of those in Oceania, to which Joe already talked about which areas those are, lack knowledge of enterprise cybersecurity or cyber insurance type, followed by North America at 49% and then Europe at 43%. So there's just a little bit of a disconnect there. And I think when we look at small to medium enterprises, I think in my mind, the expectation is that there's a little bit more information. There's opportunity to be more collaborative at that point there. But we shall see next year when we ask it again. Next slide. Okay, so on the left there, that pie chart there refers to a question: does your organization's cyber insurance policy adequately address your risk profile? You see the large percentage, more than half said somewhat. Probably not too surprising there. On the right is, has your organization ever used its cyber insurance policy? To which 1 in 3 have. 96% of respondents in organizations that have cybersecurity cyber insurance report that their policy at least somewhat addresses their risk profile. That's a good number. And of those respondents who are aware that their enterprise uses its policy, most believe that the policy has complete coverage. That one I find a little hard to believe there. Joe, I know a lot of people are a little leery of speaking to cyber insurance. Is there anything you would like to add, or would you like to pass on that?
Oh no, I'm happy to add. I think one of the things that we forget is just because you have cyber insurance doesn't mean that cyber insurance is going to be paid out on if you have a breach. It's going to come back to what were you doing to protect yourself, or indeed, why did you get breached? So to me, it's something that it's kind of like the necessary evil. It's like same as house insurance, right? You've got to have it because you don't know what might happen, but they don't necessarily pay out when it comes down to it.
Absolutely, right. That very, very much indicative of insurance at large. Next slide, please. We're going to shift into security operations. Actually, to go back one, please, just for a second. So average size of security staff is 16 individuals this year. Roughly 1/3 of respondents had at least 25. That's a pretty darn large. Again, based on the large number of, if you think back to that first line demographics, large majority of respondents was a 1,500 plus member enterprise. And then 25 doesn't sound that large. Before we dive into this section, we do have a polling question. If you would bring that up.
John, just to let you know, we need to look at moving to questions because we've got quite a few coming up.
Okay, perfect. Well, we're right at the home stretch. Okay, can we get just a snapshot of where those responses came in on the polling question? Okay, perfect. Okay. Anything real quick that stands out to you, Jo?
Not really, except to say I'm surprised at the number of people who are actually already doing guidance, because from my discussion with other CISOs, it's something that's on the back burner in many organizations. So good on you, organizations that are doing that.
Very good. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're down to the home stretch here. Okay, so AI use in security operations here. So this question, does your organization use AI in any of the following aspects up here on seed? So automation of threat detection response tops the list, followed by endpoint, and then just automating there. There's a lot of none of the above, prefer not to answer, do not know there. Respondent reporting that their enterprise is increasing reliance or automation. That number still isn't very large, even though it kind of rebounded. We talked about that earlier in the presentation. Next slide. Security involvement within enterprise. We're not going to belabor this a whole lot, but this slide and the next one were a little concerning. If this question was, were you or anyone on your team involved in the development, onboarding, or implementation of AI? And almost half were not. That's pretty darn concerning, especially when you consider AI as this overarching large umbrella, and especially enterprises that are using chatbots, customer service, or whatnot. Security people need to be in that picture, right? There's data at play. Between acquisition, contracting, and all that, there's room for improvement there. And next slide. Similarly, when asked if they were involved in policy development, again, just over 1 in 3 were. And the 10% that say it does not apply to their organization are sadly mistaken, because whether you think it or not, chances are better than not that employees are using some form of AI to aid their job. And, whether it's ChatGPT or any of that, it's putting corporate data at risk. So with that, this concludes my presentation, and we will shift to Q&A.
Thank you very much, John. It was a great presentation, as I expected. We do have a question here. Why do so many businesses or / employers overlook the values of professional development when the cost to hire is so much more?
Well, you touched on this one with the discretionary spending, right, aspect
Correct.
of it. And this data point here in particular, I think where our viewers need to kind of remember in the grand scheme of things is that cybersecurity, while we're a new profession, some of this stuff it's universal across all industries. There's a lot of academic research to speak to that data point. There's cultural things that have to shift there, but let's make no mistake, in some cases, the training is very costly. It costs a lot more for cyber-related people than it does some of these other occupations throughout a company.
Yep, great. John, I've got another one here for you. With the importance of data in the age of AI, is there a specific reason why there is a downward trend in cybersecurity budgets? And additionally, are there any industries or professional associations currently doing anything to prevent this? I'll just jump in and say, I don't think professional associations can prevent what employers want to do. We can make recommendations, and we can do that when we advocate for and on behalf of our constituency to governments, but we can't prevent it. John, what else do you have to say about that?
I would also add, I think that that's a great point. That is it in a nutshell. But the opposing view on that too is that the more we want rules and mandates that thou shalt not do, there's a cost associated with that. And I think we're ultimately where we're at is, listen, the budgets, I truly believe we're at a point of saturation right now. Like I think that we're just at that point is you just can't keep adding budget. No organization could keep increasing budget without taking from somewhere or raising the cost of goods and services to which, if that's your organization, consumers are going to backlash.
Correct. And there's already a squeeze on consumers. So also here's one that's a local one. In Australia, how can we use cyber insurance, especially for educational institutions? I'm not an expert in either cyber insurance or indeed in educational institutions, but I will say this much, that as I said previously, this is something that I think organisations do need to look at, but you need to very carefully look at what your cyber insurance covers you for and what is the expectation of the insurer on you as an organisation, because it will be, unless you do X, Y, and Z, yes, John, I said Z, X, Y, and Z, they're not going to pay out if you have an issue. So that's the thing to remember about cyber insurance. It's not one size fits all either. And a lot of organizations, particularly small to medium enterprises, are finding it very expensive at this point in time. Another question here. Given the discussion regarding the stress associated with these roles, what are your views in optimizing the use of LLMs, so large language models, for threat detection and incident classification activity in cybersecurity? Now, John, I think some of our best of breed tools are really already doing that. There's already that level of automation that's sort of on the edge of LLMs, right?
There is, and I think so. We're seeing some of that. We're also seeing that the three major cloud providers, right? When we talk about just AI and right, because right, the LLM is the horsepower, right? But there's a front end engine to that there, and so there's a call for transparency that's happening right now. Like, prove to me that what you say it's supposed to be doing is in fact what's on the outcome. So there's rapid upskilling that has to happen there. Do I think large language models and AI in general can help cyber defenders? I do, with a caveat that it does not eliminate the need for cyber professionals to be able to actually do the deeper analysis, right? If anything else, here's the concern I have, Joe, is I think that the more technology we do and we talk about what positions might be affected, I think it's those lower level ones that we already don't have enough of. And then how do we get people the experience? So that's the concern I have.
Okay, I think we've got time for one lucky last question before we wrap up. Can you comment on the decline in enterprise security budget in relation to the increased government focus on security of critical infrastructure? It's a
Not
tough
really.
question.
That's a tough one, right? Because here's the only thing I'm going to say is that, ISACA as a global organization, our members are in a lot of unique different situations, and no government is entirely the same. Here's what I do know. There's a lack of agreement as to what constitutes critical infrastructure, and that's a problem. And then it's further complicated that depending on where you are across the globe, you've got a lot of private entities that are providing public services. And I think the combination of those things, make no mistake, it's important. The way of life, most places you go anywhere, you can't buy, if you have a cyber outage and it doesn't have to be attacked. Internet goes down, services go offline, misconfiguration. You can't get money out of a bank, out of an ATM. You can't buy gas, electricity, internet. Like, we really need to kind of rethink what the backup plan is.
Oh, absolutely 100%. We saw that, did we not, with a certain incident that happened in July, and I believe American Airlines and Delta had to take their aircraft out of the sky. So I get it. We do have one, and I think one thing I should say about that here is that we do have the Security of Critical Infrastructure, or SOCI, legislation in place here. So that's why there is a government focus on it.
Okay.
We also have a highly privatized critical infrastructure landscape. So that makes a difference here as well. We do have one final question that I've been asked for us to try and squeeze right in. What advice can you provide for people coming from non-traditional pathways into a cybersecurity role, such as they don't have a university degree?
Okay, networking. At the end of the day, since the beginning of time, it's about who you know. If you're in a lateral, trying to come from another occupation, get involved with some local, a local body of professionals. ISACA has chapters across the globe. You can find people, and ISACA has a mentorship. I think there's a mentorship program in place. Chapters are doing their own thing. There's always a way to translate your experience in other work roles into the type of work we do.
Yeah, and look, really good point, John. ACS has branches across Australia. We also have an international group as well. And so always there are networking events and opportunities. So I think it's the same thing. Get out there, get involved actively. You will meet other people. I have not looked for a job for, I hate to say it, nearly 20 years, because there's always been somebody in my network from one of those professional bodies who said, hey, would you be interested in whatever? So that's one of the things. So I think it's now time to wrap up. But I just want to let you know about some of the benefits that you have access to as an ACS member. Your ACS membership comes with various benefits to help you continue your professional development, which has been a hot topic today, extend your skills and abilities, and advance your career. If you scan the QR code, and being security professionals, we don't really like them, but if you scan the QR code to find out more, and if you're not a member already, this is a great opportunity to consider signing up as well. Also, we have a bit of information on an ISACA conference. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is terrific. Local connections, global insights. And I love that feeling. So join the ISACA virtual conference, which will be held from the 18th to the 20th of February, 2025, where innovation meets insight. Dive into a world of cutting-edge discussions on AI, emerging technologies, and digital transformation across the Asia-Pacific regions, and the Americas and EMEA as well. With diverse sessions tailored to each region, you'll gain invaluable risk, security, and privacy knowledge while earning up to 19.5 continuing professional ed credits, which for all of us is really important. And this is a global pass. If you have a global pass, you'll get the 19.5 or 6.5 CPE credits with a day pass to the sessions. Registration is open now, and I believe the information is on the screen for you. So finally, I'd like to once again thank you all for joining us today. It's been fantastic having such a great audience and some fabulous chats going on as well on the side, and great questions. Please take a minute to complete the post-event survey via the link in the pop-up that I think we've already had. We're dedicated to providing you better experiences, so your feedback is really valuable to us. For ISACA members, after viewing this webinar, you are eligible to self-claim one CPE. Sorry, guys, it's just the one. This event will be made available on YouTube or on-demand viewing over the next 365 days as well. So you can also, if you've registered, you can also pick those points up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of your day. John, thank you. It was mighty.
Always a pleasure, Jo. Thank you for having us.